Okay, yes, I said I settled for him, and I might have slipped once with my ex, but it was therapy, not a confession booth. I was processing, venting. He had no right to eavesdrop like some jealous creep and then act like I'm the villain. If anything, I was being honest. He just couldn't handle it. Before I walk you through the full story, I just have a small favor to ask. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments. What city are you watching from? It's always amazing to see how far this audience is reaching. Now, let's get back to the story. The day my life fell apart started like any other Thursday. I had my weekly therapy appointment at 2 in the afternoon, something I'd been doing for the past 3 months to work through some relationship anxiety I'd been feeling. Dr. Martinez had been helping me understand why I sometimes felt restless in my engagement, why I caught myself wondering if there was something more exciting out there waiting for me. I thought therapy was supposed to be a safe space where you could say anything without judgment. I thought it was where you went to process complicated feelings before they became bigger problems. I never imagined that my private session would become the reason I lost everything. The session that day had been particularly intense. Dr. Martinez had been pushing me to be more honest about my feelings toward Liam, to really examine whether my doubts were normal pre-wedding jitters or something more serious. She'd been encouraging me to speak my truth, even if it was uncomfortable. So I did. I told her things I'd never said out loud before. I admitted that sometimes I felt like I was settling for Liam, not because he was a bad person, but because our relationship felt safe instead of passionate. I told her about how I sometimes missed the excitement I'd felt with my ex-boyfriend Drew, how Liam never made my heart race the way Drew had. And then, because Dr. Martinez had been encouraging complete honesty, I told her about the night 6 months ago when I'd run into Drew at a work conference and ended up in his hotel room. Just once. A moment of weakness that I'd been carrying around like a stone in my chest ever since. I thought saying it out loud would help me process the guilt and figure out how to move forward with Liam. I thought therapy was where you went to work through your mistakes privately before they destroyed your life publicly. I never thought Liam would be standing outside the door, listening to every word. When I walked out of Dr. Martinez's office that Thursday afternoon, I expected to find the waiting room empty like always. Instead, Liam was standing in the hallway, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. His face was completely pale, and he was staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. My first reaction was confusion. Liam never picked me up from therapy. He respected my space and usually waited for me to come home and share whatever I felt comfortable sharing. Seeing him there felt wrong, like he was violating an unspoken boundary we'd established. "Hey," I said, walking toward him with a smile. "What are you doing here? This is a nice surprise." But Liam didn't smile back. He didn't move from his position against the wall. He just looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between heartbreak and disgust. "Did you really settle for me?" he asked quietly. The question hit me like a physical blow. My stomach dropped, and I felt my face flush with panic. I looked around the hallway, suddenly aware that other people might be listening, that this was not the place for whatever conversation was about to happen. "What are you talking about?" I asked, though I already knew exactly what he was talking about. I could see it in his eyes, the knowledge that hadn't been there when I'd kissed him goodbye that morning. Liam held up his phone, and I could see that he'd been recording something. My heart started racing as I realized what had happened, what he'd done. "I heard everything, Jenna," he said. "Every word you said in there, about settling for me, about missing Drew, about the hotel room." I felt like the floor was collapsing underneath me. The hallway seemed to spin, and I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling over. This couldn't be happening. This was therapy. This was private. This was supposed to be safe. "You were recording me," I whispered, unable to believe what I was hearing. "You were spying on my therapy session." But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't what had happened. The walls in Dr. Martinez's building were thin, and if Liam had arrived early and stood in the right spot, he could have heard everything without meaning to. He could have heard me say that I settled for him, that I missed my ex, that I'd betrayed him in the worst possible way. Liam shook his head slowly. I came to surprise you. I was going to take you to lunch after your appointment. I got here early and sat down to wait, and then I heard your voice through the door. I tried to walk away, he continued, his voice getting quieter. I tried to give you privacy. But then I heard you say my name, and I couldn't help myself. I stood there and listened to you tell a stranger that you settled for me, that you wish you were with someone else, that you cheated on me 6 months ago. The way he said it made me realize how terrible it must have sounded from his perspective. In the safety of Dr. Martinez's office, those revelations had felt like progress, like honest self-examination. But hearing them secondhand, as someone who wasn't supposed to know about them, they must have felt like a series of brutal attacks. Liam, I started, but he held up his hand to stop me. 4 years, Jenna, 4 years I've been loving you, planning a future with you, thinking we were building something real together, and the whole time you've been settling for me. The whole time you've been wishing you were with someone else. That's not what I said, I protested, even though we both knew it was exactly what I'd said. I was processing feelings in therapy. That's what you're supposed to do there. It doesn't mean those feelings are my final truth. But Liam wasn't listening anymore. He was looking at me like he'd never seen me before, like I was a stranger wearing his fiancé's face. You cheated on me, he said simply. 6 months ago, while we were planning our wedding, while I was working overtime to save money for our honeymoon, while I was calling you every night to tell you how much I loved you and missed you. I wanted to explain about the conference, about how lonely I'd been feeling, about how Drew had made me remember what it felt like to be desired instead of just loved. But looking at Liam's face, I realized there was no explanation that would make any of this okay. It was one night, I said weakly. It didn't mean anything. I was confused and hurt by what? Liam's voice was getting louder now, and I could see other people in the hallway starting to notice our conversation. Hurt by me loving you. Hurt by me working to build us a stable future. Hurt by me not being exciting enough for you? I didn't know how to answer that question because the truth was too complicated and too cruel. I had been hurt by his emotional distance, by the way he seemed to take our relationship for granted sometimes, by his assumption that stability was enough to sustain love. But I'd also been hurt by my own restlessness, my own inability to appreciate what I had instead of longing for what I didn't. Liam waited for me to respond, but when I couldn't find the words, he nodded like I'd confirmed something he already knew. I'm done, Jenna, he said. I can't marry someone who thinks so little of me that she has to process whether I'm worth staying with. I can't build a life with someone who's been lying to me for months. Then he turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the hallway outside my therapist's office, watching the man I was supposed to marry disappear around the corner. Let me tell you about the months leading up to that therapy session because I need you to understand how I got to that point. I need you to see that I wasn't just some heartless woman who cheated for fun and then complained about her devoted fiancé to a therapist. The problems in my relationship with Liam had been building for over a year, though I'd been too afraid to address them directly. On paper, everything was perfect. Liam was successful, responsible, and completely devoted to me. He worked as an architect and made good money. He was kind to my family, helped with household chores, and never forgot important dates. But somewhere along the way, our relationship had become more like a business partnership than a romance. We functioned well together, but we'd lost the spark that had brought us together in the first place. Our conversations revolved around logistics, wedding planning, mortgage applications, whose turn it was to buy groceries. Liam seemed content with this evolution, like he thought growing up meant settling into a comfortable routine. But I felt like I was slowly disappearing into the role of dutiful fiancé, losing the parts of myself that felt vibrant and alive. I tried to talk to Liam about this several times, but he always responded with practical solutions instead of emotional engagement. When I said I felt disconnected from him, He suggested we schedule more date nights. When I said I missed feeling desired, he bought me flowers and told me I was beautiful. When I said I felt like we were more like roommates than lovers, he planned a romantic weekend getaway. All of his responses were loving and well-intentioned, but they missed the deeper issue. I didn't need more romance or more attention. I needed to feel like he saw me as a whole person instead of just the woman he was supposed to marry. The worst part was that I couldn't explain this to him without sounding ungrateful or selfish. How do you tell someone who loves you completely that their love doesn't feel like enough? How do you say that you need more passion, more intensity, more emotional risk-taking without making them feel inadequate? So I kept my feelings to myself and tried to convince myself that what we had was enough. I told myself that real love was supposed to be stable and secure, not dramatic and overwhelming. I tried to appreciate Liam's consistency instead of craving someone else's unpredictability. That's the mindset I was in when I went to the work conference in Chicago 6 months ago. I was feeling emotionally starved and increasingly resentful of Liam's inability to see what was missing from our relationship. The conference was for marketing professionals, and I'd been looking forward to it for weeks. Not because I was particularly excited about the presentations, but because it represented a break from my routine, a chance to remember who I was outside of my relationship with Liam. I didn't expect to see Drew there. We'd dated for 2 years in college, and it had ended badly when he cheated on me with my roommate. I hadn't spoken to him in over 5 years, and I'd assumed he was completely out of my life forever. But there he was at the opening reception, looking exactly the same except more confident and successful. He was working for a creative agency in New York, traveling constantly, living the kind of exciting life I sometimes fantasized about. We started talking casually, catching up on each other's lives and careers. I told him about Liam and our engagement, and he told me about his recent breakup with a model he'd been dating. The conversation was easy and familiar, like no time had passed at all. Drew always had this way of making me feel like the most interesting person in the room. He asked thoughtful questions about my work and remembered details about my dreams and ambitions that even Liam sometimes forgot. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in months. When he suggested we get drinks after the reception, I said yes without thinking about the implications. I told myself it was just 2 old friends catching up, that there was nothing wrong with enjoying conversation with someone who understood me, but I knew I was lying to myself even as I did it. We went to a hotel bar and talked for hours about everything and nothing. Drew told me about his travels and his work, and I found myself sharing feelings about my career and my relationship that I'd never articulated before. He listened without trying to fix anything, without offering solutions or advice. He just let me be complicated and uncertain without judgment. When he walked me back to my hotel room, I knew what was going to happen. I knew I should say goodnight and close the door and call Liam and remember all the reasons I loved him. Instead, I invited Drew inside. What happened next was everything my relationship with Liam wasn't. It was impulsive and passionate and completely focused on the present moment instead of future plans. Drew made me feel desired in a way that was urgent and consuming, like he couldn't get enough of me. For those few hours, I felt like myself again. Not Liam's fiancé or anyone's future wife, just Jenna, a woman who was wanted and appreciated and alive. But when I woke up the next morning, the guilt hit me like a physical blow. I looked at Drew sleeping next to me and realized I'd just destroyed the most important relationship in my life for a few hours of feeling special. I left before Drew woke up and flew home to Liam, who picked me up at the airport with flowers and asked about my trip with genuine interest. I lied and told him it was productive but boring, then went to the bathroom and cried until I couldn't breathe. For the next 6 months, I carried that secret like a weight in my chest. Every time Liam kissed me, or told me he loved me, or made plans for our future, I felt like a fraud. Every time he talked about trust and honesty, and how lucky he felt to have found me, I wanted to confess everything and beg for forgiveness. But I was too much of a coward to risk losing him, and too selfish to stop planning a wedding with a man I'd betrayed. That's when I started therapy. I told Dr. Martinez I was having pre-wedding anxiety and some relationship concerns, but I didn't mention the affair right away. I spent weeks talking around the issue, trying to understand my feelings without revealing their full context. Dr. Martinez kept pushing me to be more honest about what was really bothering me. She said therapy only worked if you were willing to confront uncomfortable truths, if you were brave enough to examine your real feelings instead of the feelings you thought you should have. So gradually, I started telling her more. I admitted that I sometimes felt like I was settling for Liam, that I missed the excitement I'd felt with Drew, that I wondered if I was making a mistake by getting married. And then, finally, I told her about the night in Chicago. I told her about the guilt and the shame and the confusion about what it all meant for my relationship with Liam. Dr. Martinez didn't judge me or tell me I was a terrible person. She helped me understand that the affair was a symptom of deeper issues in my relationship, not just a random moment of weakness. She encouraged me to think about what I really wanted from love and whether Liam could give it to me. But she also made it clear that I needed to tell Liam about what had happened. She said secrets like that poisoned relationships from the inside, that real intimacy required complete honesty even when it was painful. I kept promising I would tell him, but I never found the courage. I was too afraid of losing him, too selfish to risk destroying the comfortable life we'd built together. So instead, I kept going to therapy and talking about my feelings without taking any action to address them. I used those sessions as a pressure valve, a place to vent my frustrations and doubts without actually changing anything. I never imagined that Liam would hear those conversations. I never thought my private processing would become his devastating reality. When I got home that Thursday evening after the confrontation in the hallway, I expected to find Liam waiting for me so we could talk through what had happened. I'd spent the drive home preparing what I would say, how I would explain that therapy was about processing feelings, not making final decisions. Instead, I found that my key no longer worked in our front door. I stood on the porch of the house we'd been renting together for 2 years, turning my key over and over in the lock, unable to believe what was happening. Liam had changed the locks. In the 6 hours since our confrontation, he'd somehow managed to lock me out of my own home. I called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted him asking what was happening, why I couldn't get into the house, where my belongings were. No response. I sat on the front steps until it got dark, hoping he would come home and we could figure this out like adults. But when his car finally pulled into the driveway at 9 o'clock, he walked past me like I wasn't there and went inside without saying a word. I spent that night in a hotel, calling and texting Liam every few hours with increasingly desperate messages. I apologized for the affair, for lying, for saying I settled for him. I promised we could work through this if he would just talk to me. I begged him to remember how much we loved each other, how much we'd built together. He never responded to any of it. The next day, I went to work in the same clothes I'd worn the day before, trying to pretend everything was normal while my entire life fell apart. My co-workers could tell something was wrong, but I was too humiliated to explain what had happened. During my lunch break, I called Dr. Martinez and told her about the eavesdropping incident. I expected her to be outraged on my behalf, to agree that Liam had violated my privacy and overreacted to what was supposed to be confidential therapeutic processing. Instead, she was quiet for a long time before responding. "Jenna," she said finally, "I think you need to consider that this might be an opportunity for honesty instead of a violation of privacy. You've been struggling with how to tell Liam about the affair for months. Now he knows, and you have a chance to work through this together if you're both willing." But I told her that Liam clearly wasn't willing, that he'd locked me out and was refusing to communicate. I said I felt betrayed by his eavesdropping, that he had no right to listen to my private therapy session, even if it was accidental. Dr. Martinez suggested that maybe I was focusing on Liam's behavior because it was easier than examining my own. She asked me to consider how I would feel if I overheard my fiancé telling a therapist that he'd settled for me and cheated on me. I didn't want to consider that perspective because it made me feel like the villain in my own story. I wanted to be the wronged party, the one whose privacy had been violated, not the one who had lied and cheated and hurt someone who loved me. That weekend, I stayed with my friend Tara while I tried to figure out what to do next. I expected her to be sympathetic and supportive, to agree that Liam was being dramatic and unfair. Instead, Tara listened to my story with an expression I couldn't read, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Jenna," she said finally, "I love you, but I have to be honest. If my fiancé had been lying to me about cheating for 6 months and then told a therapist he settled for me, I'd probably react the same way Liam did. I tried to explain that it wasn't that simple, that therapy was supposed to be a safe space for processing complicated feelings, that I'd been trying to work through my issues before they became bigger problems." But Tara just shook her head. "You weren't processing," she said. "You were avoiding. You were using therapy as an excuse to not deal with the real problems in your relationship." She pointed out that in all my months of therapy, I'd never actually done anything to improve my relationship with Liam. I'd never told him about the affair, never addressed my feelings of settling, never worked on the emotional distance I claimed to feel. "You just complained about him to Dr. Martinez every week instead of talking to him about what you needed," Tara said. "And now you're surprised that he's hurt when he found out what you really think of him." Her words stung because they were true. I had been using therapy as a way to avoid dealing with my problems, not as a tool for solving them. I'd been treating Dr. Martinez like a confidant instead of a professional who was supposed to help me take action. Over the next few days, I tried reaching out to other friends for support, but the response was consistently lukewarm. Word had gotten out about what had happened, apparently because Liam had told a few people in our friend group about the affair and the therapy session. Nobody was openly taking sides, but I could tell that most people thought I was in the wrong. They were polite but distant when I tried to explain my side of the story, like they didn't want to get involved in the drama I'd created. I realized that in losing Liam, I was also losing the social circle we'd built together over 4 years. These people had been planning to be wedding guests, and now they were witnesses to the spectacular implosion of our relationship. 2 weeks after Liam locked me out, I finally got a text from him. It was brief and businesslike. "Your things are in boxes on the back porch. Please pick them up when I'm not home." I drove to the house that afternoon and found 3 cardboard boxes containing my clothes, books, and personal items. Everything was neatly packed and carefully organized, which somehow made it worse. Even in ending our relationship, Liam was being thoughtful and considerate. I carried the boxes to my car and then sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, staring at the house where I'd thought I would live forever. The garden we'd planted together was starting to bloom, and I could see the outline of the dining room table Liam had built by hand for our future family dinners. All of it felt like evidence of a life I'd thrown away for a few hours of excitement with someone who didn't even want a relationship with me. I never saw Liam in person again after that day in the therapist's hallway. He made it clear through mutual friends that he didn't want any contact, that he was trying to move on and needed space to heal. I respected his wishes, but I also wrote him dozens of letters that I never sent. I composed long emails explaining myself, apologizing, begging for another chance. But every time I reread them, they sounded like excuses and justifications instead of genuine accountability. The truth was that I'd betrayed Liam in multiple ways. By cheating, by lying, by treating our relationship like something I could take or leave instead of something precious that deserved protection. No amount of explaining could undo that damage.